Hi, I'm Nancy Shanto, and this is the second in this week's Facebook Live series on obstacles to cooperation. If you can see and hear me, please post in the comments and let me know that everything is working. And I'm going to wait till I get confirmation before we get started. If you're watching this later, please type replay in the comments. I'd love to learn something fun or quirky about you too, so put that in the comments as well. And I'll be putting comments on the screen during this broadcast. So if you prefer I don't share your comments, let me know that as well. So let's just make sure this is up and running. Yes, it looks like we're on. So hopefully I can be heard. Please share a comment just to let me know you can hear me. And we'll get started as soon as I get that confirmation. So if you get a chance, anyone? Hello, hello, hello. Oops, wrong button. No, not that. If you can hear me, I see some more people have joined us. If you can hear me, please post in the comments that you can hear me. Oh, yay. Okay. I see Sarah and Tyler. Thank you for joining. Okay, great. So we're talking about obstacles to cooperation. And the first thing we need to do when we talk about obstacles to cooperation is define cooperation. So in Skills for Change, we use the definition of cooperation from the Radical Therapy Collective. They defined cooperation in the positive as ask for 100% of what you want 100% of the time, and then negotiate agreements. So we're thinking about ourselves as autonomous individuals. We're asking for what we want and then creating an agreement that is in that shared space. You know, if you think of Venn diagrams, the crossover is where we're making our agreements. They also will offer a negative definition of cooperation, which boils down to not power playing each other. I often call this non-coercion when I'm talking about it in my writing. In relationship anarchy, we often will talk about non-hierarchy, and I find that to be a little problematic because hierarchy is talking about having power over. There's times when we need to be able to delegate some structure in order to operate efficiently, in order to operate within timeframes. And in order to do that, we're going to need to put in some hierarchy, and it just gets people very confused. But if you're not power playing anyone and you're not letting yourself be power played, then we're much more accurately describing ourselves as being cooperative. And I like to work from that definition. No secrets, no lies, no rescues, and no power plays is the way that we say the negative version of the cooperative contract or the cooperative agreement from the Radical Therapy Collective. It's helpful to enhance this definition with a few points. In order to cooperate, we need to be able to, with full empowerment, say yes and say no. So we have to be able to speak up and share our 100%. And we also need to be able to enact our boundaries when we say no. And I'm not talking about boundary violations or abuse right now. I'm talking about consensual activities when we're doing things with the intention of cooperating, both people trying to bring their yeses and their nos to the table, both people trying not to power play each other. So boundary violations and abuse are obviously power plays, so that doesn't fit into this definition. Although people will often end up in power plays primarily through rescuing, because that's the thing that we do when we are trying desperately to solve problems of competition or scarcity or danger. And we'll often do something that's more than our share or more than we want to do in order to try and solve a problem. and not realize that we're doing something unilateral and without consent. We didn't slow down long enough to get agreement. And that can be solved by asking for 100% of what we want. Sometimes we can't do that, so then we're definitely in a situation where we're doing our best. And we try and bring these ideals to our circumstances and enact them in the ways that we're able to. So internally, in order to have our yes and our no internally, we need two things. We need sufficient power to protect ourselves, and we need self-trust. We have to be able to forgive ourselves when we make mistakes, and we also need to be able to protect ourselves if something is happening that is threatening our autonomy. So I've talked about this quite a bit in writing on power and trust. In the book Access to Power, there's a whole chapter on that. I'm going to drop a link in the chat later so that you can read more about power and trust on the Skills for Changemakers Patreon. And while I'm mentioning my Patreon, if you're interested in these ideas, I have written a lot, a lot. And I love it when people follow me, engage in the community, in the conversation. And I, while I'm talking about my patrons, thank you. I wouldn't be here right now teaching if it wasn't for my patron support. So I'm just so appreciative. So I'll put that post in later. So if we go back to cooperation, just to recap, we need our yes, we need our no, we need a sense of self-trust. We know that we're able to cooperate with others when we ask for 100% of what we want, and we are able to negotiate agreements, and when there's an absence of power plays. And that's going to flip to the other person as well. We want to make sure that they have their yes, they have their no, that they have enough self-trust to protect themselves, that they are able to ask for 100% of what they want, that they can negotiate agreements on their own behalf, and that they're not power playing as well, or allowing themselves to be power played. So we have autonomy, we have self-trust, we have asking for 100% of what we want and negotiating. So now that we can cooperate, what gets in the way? So I said I was going to talk about obstacles, and let's see, if you are hanging in there, if you don't have any questions, why don't you post something in the chat to let me know? Let's see, why don't you type cooperation or something like that in the chat? Just let me know that you're hanging in. If you have a question, I'm happy to take them. And I know I've written out these scripts, so like it's kind of funny, but I am open to being interrupted. Okay, there's 7 obstacles to power plays, to cooperation that I want to talk about. So I've already talked about number 1, which is power plays. Secrets, lies, withholds. So withhold power plays are power plays. So you might withhold love, you might withhold support, you might withhold resources. Making demands is a power play. Refusing to negotiate, manipulating somebody, acting unilaterally. Boundaries. We have boundaries, and they're unilateral actions. We are enacting boundaries, and we're saying, I'm not willing to cooperate, with you around this. I'm going to take care of myself and switch back to autonomy. We have to have our autonomy in order to cooperate. Our boundaries are how we know that, but they are actually, we're not negotiating our boundary. And then when we rescue by doing more than our share or more than we want to do, more than our share, more than we want to do, or less than our share and less than we want to do. So for example, if people are living in a household together, and someone makes a large purchase, such as a car or an appliance, and expects everybody to support that purchase and share the cost of that purchase without seeking input, that is a power play. Or someone might get rid of a piece of furniture, again, without consulting anyone, the other people who live there. I've worked with roommates, and so, yes, our space is our space. But when you're living with a roommate, a chunk of the space is shared space. And if you were to, just arbitrarily decide, I'm going to start Airbnb my room, and you're going to have all of these people coming through the house, and those people are going to be using the shared space, and they're going to be using it in the following ways. And without talking to anyone about that, that would be a huge power play. So oftentimes, where we're power playing is in the area, again, the area of places where we're entangled, where we're sharing space, sharing resources, or sharing time. It's more difficult to power play people when you don't have access to any of those things in common. So another way so obstacle number 2, failure to keep agreements. So problems with capacity or competency can cause failure to keep agreements. Capacity being if you're too busy to keep an agreement, that would be a capacity issue. So you might say, yes, I will drop your letter off at the post office when I go, but then you don't go to the post office, or you go to the post office and forget because you're too scattered. That might be a capacity issue. Or it might be a competency issue, like making a promise to um, maybe clean something that we don't know how to clean. So, you know, cleaning the refrigerator or something like that. It's not that complicated of a thing to clean, but if you were to do it in a way that isn't meeting other people's standards, that might be a failure to keep an agreement. We said we would clean the refrigerator. We're not doing it in the way that everybody else wants it cleaned. And that competency skill is in the way of us being able to keep that agreement. That's not a very good example. I'll think of a better one. We might not realize that an agreement is too far away from our 100%. So then we're not going to be able to keep it because we're acting against our own values, or we're acting against our best interests. We might not keep track of the agreements that we've made. That's kind of a competency issue. And we might not be skilled enough to keep the agreements that we've made. Again, that's a competency issue. So, for example, people might make an agreement based on a veto impulse, where they might ask somebody to stop dating a third party to end a fight. We're having a fight. They say, I don't want you to date this person anymore. And this person, because they want the fight to end, says yes. They've made this agreement, but they don't actually intend to keep it. This is also an example of couples privilege. So you can see how, this leads to our next example, differences in power, number 3. This can happen when one person goes one up or one down. Extremely large structural or cultural power differences can cause challenges with cooperation, since one person might not have the power to protect themselves from the other person's decision. So, I was reading a conversation the other day about someone who wanted to be a foster parent. This person lived with a roommate and wanted the roommate to also be included in the decision and the training. Makes sense. They're bringing a child into the household. The person doing the interviewing said they did not want the other person to go through the training. That living with a roommate might pose a problem for fostering in general. Although if the roommate had been a romantic and sexual partner, it wouldn't be a problem for both of them to go through the training. And in that same thread, a man shared a story expressing that he wanted to foster. He went through this huge process. He loved children. He wanted to get ready, and then was summarily denied because they automatically didn't trust him to be a good parent based on his gender. So these kinds of structural differences can really affect people's ability to cooperate, right? If you know that the culture is inherently biased against you, it is going to limit your ability to say yes and say no, to protect yourself. You might not have enough power to protect yourself from a situation. Oftentimes, it's better. It seems like it's better now in some places, but in some places, child custody is similar. That, the mother gets highly prioritized as being the safe parent, and other parents don't get treated the same way. And of course, we're seeing also people getting more rights in certain municipalities. So it could really depend on your context whether or not you're getting um, the differences in power really affecting your ability to cooperate with someone. We would definitely see this with like a boss employee relationship, or a landlord tenant relationship. Even in roommates, the roommate that's on the lease might have more power than the other roommates. I have been recently helping a friend who is going through a pretty significant set of conflicts with a new roommate who moved in and who was just not a good fit for the household. The other roommates actually moved out temporarily to get away from this roommate. And my friend actually went through this whole legal process. The person on the lease went through this whole legal process, trying to figure out what kind of rights that she had in order to be able to ask this other person to leave. We were dealing with unprecedented circumstances. This person was bringing people into a household that had decided that they didn't want people coming into the household with, based on COVID. Obviously, it can get very intense when we're dealing with housing insecurity and differences in power. But those kinds of differences can really affect our ability to cooperate. Um, a failure to bring up issues in a timely manner. So this is number 4. When we wait too long to clear held feelings and stories, when we act on stories without checking whether they're true, and when we build up too much resentment or resignation, or we lose hope. I've worked with people who, during the middle of a fight with a romantic partner, would say something like, "I'm done." And then later, the other person would act as if the relationship had ended. If there had been a breakup, they would act surprised, saying they didn't mean they were breaking up. They were just expressing frustration with a particular pattern. I was working with a situation where that happened, and one person, the person who had been told "I'm done," took it seriously, took it at face value, and left. And the other person didn't mean for that to be the intent of that statement. I was planning on talking about this tomorrow in the repair broken trust conversation. And one of the things that I do in order to address something like that is to actually create an exit process so that people know when they're actually leaving a relationship. And if you don't hear those codes, if you don't hear that language of the exit, then you know that somebody's just saying something in the heat of the moment. Although it's good if we don't say things in the heat of the moment that we don't mean. Uh, and the heat of the moment is called the heat of the moment because we don't necessarily do what's in our best interests. Number 5, internalized depression. When we tell ourselves judgmental stories about ourselves or others, or when we require other people to reassure us over and over again, when we assume other people have judgmental stories about us, even though we haven't checked our story about that, and when we shame ourselves for feeling ashamed or judgmental, these are all examples of ways internalized depression can get in the way of us cooperating. I was talking with someone today who is feeling very depleted, and she confessed that she's been having more judgmental thoughts about other people. She recalled that she used to have a lot of judgmental thoughts when she was a teenager. She was really critical inside her head about people, like extremely harsh, and it made her feel very bad about herself. We talked about how internalized depression, internalized depressive beliefs can often prompt us to respond to feelings of powerlessness with coping strategies. So, even though it's not very generative to be critical or contemptuous or to defend ourselves or blame somebody or stonewall, we might not have access to our generative solutions. So we might be engaging non-generative ones. And I have a write-up I just did about this, John Gottman's Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse. I call them non-generative responses to feelings of powerlessness. And I'll post in the comments about that. When people are really engaged with, criticism or contempt, or we're engaged with our internal judgments of ourselves, shame, blame, that kind of internal storytelling and judgment can get in the way of us being able to cooperate. When we're being really hard on ourselves and we're asking people to reassure us and we're not listening to them and not actually believing them, that can get in the way of our ability to cooperate. So that would be an example of going one down. Um, and in some way, you could think of blaming as going one up, even though it's oftentimes both sides of that formula, going one down or going one up, will be coming from um, the like feeling bad about ourselves. So people tend to, if they feel good about themselves, they tend not to go one down. And then they tend not to go one up as a result, because they like going one up tends to be a move that comes from feeling one down, which also, um, privilege and oppression can factor into going one up and going one down. That's a completely different kind of structure. So number 6, externalizing our experience. When we force a conversational partner to keep talking in a desperate attempt to recenter, when we require other people to change in order to protect ourselves from our safety responses, when we use our emotional responses to dominate a negotiation, or when we do something other than take a pause after our fight, flight, instinctual safety response engages, those are all examples of how we might externalize our experience. It's one thing to share that a situation makes us uncomfortable. It's another thing to generate so much emotional processing that our emotions become a quelling factor in the dynamic. I remember when I was first opening up a relationship to polyamory, and this was an unsuccessful attempt. The other person was perfectly happy to go off on a date, but would have a huge jealousy attack if I went on a date. And it was very hard to continue to want to pursue other date friends when I knew when I got home, I would find a drunk, angry, upset person who was going to engage me in a fight that might get physical. That was not going to be something that I wanted to do. So that kind of degree of emotional response, it's one thing to let somebody know that we're struggling with something. It's another thing to dump all of our emotions. And the more space we share, the harder it is to manage that kind of dumping experience. And if we want to share space successfully, it's really great to be able to self-regulate. 7, item number 7 is idealism. So when we have unrealistic expectations about what's possible, when we think that um, some ideal is what we should be measuring ourselves against, or we're trying to aim for an ideal that maybe is a very rare situation, or that the systems of oppression that are designed into the structure are actually opposing our ability to fulfill on the whatever the idealism is. So we might think that we should be able to do something, but it's very difficult to do. Often our idealism about what we think should happen can get in the way of what's possible. For example, when people think they should be treated a certain way in a romantic relationship, they might discount what's working. During my monogamy hangover, this was a successful attempt. I used to feel like sharing space with a sexy friend as they flirted with other people would somehow diminish my value or power in the community. Like they would see me as weak. And I realized this way of getting power from being in relationship was super cultural, and that I didn't need that source of power. I didn't even want that source of power. So I was able to flip my perspective, see myself as powerful, enjoy the sweetness between myself and my sexy friend, and also enjoy my freedom to share sexy energy with other people. And eventually, it took me a while, but I was able to enjoy them sharing their sexy energy with other people. In part, one of the things that made that possible was me getting to share mine. Then I would see them and I'd be like, oh, like we both are free in this space and it's fun. Um, and it also, if you're not thinking about relationships in terms of possession, then the whole framework of like what is successful starts to change. That whole kind of like what's a successful relationship looks like a kind of attached at the hip, controlling each other's behavior in space. Like that's some sort of cultural idealistic norm that doesn't actually seem very powerful to me now. So the kinds of things that diminish people's ability to cooperate will involve self-trust, trust of other people, and differences in power. Internalized oppression is also a really big challenge when we're trying to cooperate. And I would kind of say it's like a subcategory of differences in power. Um, so that's my presentation for today. I wanted to share with you a little bit about why I'm talking about this, why I came online to share about obstacles to cooperation. So I've set myself the audacious goal of training 10,000 cooperative communication trainers by 2031. And that is a goal that seems like almost meaningless, but it also, I know that if I could get there, the idea would be that all of those communities, all of those people would be using cooperative communication. And I really feel like because cooperative communication is power informed, it's taking into account internalized oppression. It's a level up in terms of what it has to offer people as a communication modality. That we're actually taking on the ways in which we've internalized oppressive structures and saying that communication isn't going to work unless we address those ways that we are either oppressed or involved in oppressing others, the ways in which our internalized oppression is affecting our ability to talk, the affects our stories that we tell ourselves, how we feel about ourselves, all of those things. So there's going to be a cooperative communication practitioner certification program starting May 31st. And over the next 2 weeks, I've got a bunch of bonuses coming out to try and encourage people to engage. This weekend on Saturday, there's going to be a 60-minute bonus pod call with Thea Beeling and Torrin Lee, who are the learning pod leaders for the practitioner and program builder pods, which, this whole class is about helping people become practitioners or helping people become teachers. And if you've already signed up for the program, you should have an invitation already to this call. And then the second bonus that I've got coming up is on Saturday, May 29th. Next Saturday, not this coming up Saturday, but next Saturday, there's going to be an extra call with me from 10 to 11:30 a.m. Pacific. So I'm excited. Oh yeah, Jasmine says, yes, 10,000 empowered communicators. I want to show that. That's yay. I agree. That's a wonderful goal. So I'm offering a free 20-minute strategy session between now and Friday the 28th. And you can explore how cooperative communication practitioners certification program might help your business, help you grow to become a practitioner, a facilitator, or a trainer, or a certifier of cooperative communication. And I'll put the link, again, this 20-minute strategy session link in the comments. So one of the cool things about this program, I'm going to be helping people launch their practices or programs. So if you want to help other people, you can help people work through their life circumstances, understand cooperation, figure out 100% of what they want, and negotiate. This is the course. So that's my talk. If you would like to ask any questions, I'll work on getting these links into the comments and I'll take questions. And thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate your presence, and I'm excited to hear if you have any thoughts. So share away while I go grab these links. And if you had a big takeaway too, I'd love to hear any takeaways that you had from our conversation. Maybe I should put it on the Facebook itself. Let's do that on the Facebook. In the face, friend. Here we go. Oh, I just did it twice. So that's the Patreon post on power and trust. And then here's the one on non-generative responses to powerlessness. Thanks, Sarah. I appreciate you. And here is the strategy session link. Okay. Da 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 da. La la la. Okay, I've got all those links in the comments. Any questions or feedback, takeaways before we go? Sarah said that was great. Yay, Sarah, thank you. I'm guessing that there is nothing, which, deafening silence is always a sign that I talked too fast. But thank you again for being here. I really appreciate it. And if you have any questions, I'll be still watching the comments for a few days. Go ahead and put something in the comments if you have a question about obstacles to cooperation or the course or skills for change, whatever is going on with you. I appreciate your time and look forward to chatting some more. Okay, thanks very much, everyone.